Hi everyone. We're about to begin. So I'll just start. My name is Steven Zarnfaller. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing. You probably know my name because I sent out all the invites. And I'm so happy that you're all here, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the third Brown Bag Lunch in our 2018 series. This series provides a unique opportunity for staff to interact with leadership on a number of really important topics to our work. I'm so excited to be a part of this session because my manager and mentor, although she probably doesn't know the last part, is being led by Lori Lutz, our Chief Strategy Officer. And she'll be speaking about FedCap's approach to strategic planning. So welcome, Lori. I just wanted to, before Lori starts, to say that we've already received a number of really great questions, and we would, of course, like more. So if you'd like a question to be asked, I can't promise that all of them will be answered because, we might have very, very many for this time period. But please send them to my email address. I will type it in the chat right now. There you go. Okay. So Lori, welcome, 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 welcome. And we're so excited about this presentation. So please take it away.
Thanks, Stephen, so much, and thank you, all of you who have joined us today. I am beyond psyched because if I get to talk about anything that engages certainly me in my heart and I think engages the community, it's the topic of strategic planning. So I'm going to present a lot of information in a sequence that I think will make sense to you. And then we'll take questions as we go. I'm not going to wait till the end, and Stephen will facilitate that. And so I think what we'll do now is just rock and roll. And so I want to begin with the idea that good strategic planning is driven really by just a way of thinking. And actually, this is relatively new in my psyche. I have done, a lot of strategic planning, as I'm sure many of you have over the years. And I think that when you're trying to contemplate how to approach strategic planning, there's books, there's, methodologies, there's step 1, step 2, step 3. But I have become convinced that this tiny little diagram that you have in front of you is the heart and soul of good strategic planning. And I found it when I was planning for our last strategic plan, and I sat back and I went, that's it. That is the heart of really being able to nail a strategic plan. So what does this mean? Let me just show you. I think the first thing that you want to do in any good strategic planning process is say, what do we know? What do we know about, let's say, the fields that we're working in, and what do we think is emerging? What's a new policy direction that's emerging? What are new evidence-based practices that are emerging? And we ask ourselves, what's the next thing? Is there a new financing model that's coming out? For example, when we began to transition from cost-based reimbursement to performance reimbursement. Is there a new way that the field is approaching a specific kind of intervention? Are the policy wonks starting to talk about something new and something different? What's next? What's the next thing on the horizon? And what else is next? Is there government and philanthropic funders that have really new priority messages that they put out and new goals? That changes the entire way in which we think about responding to RFPs. It changes the way we focus our conversations with government. It changes the way we write letters of intent to foundations. And what technological advancements will change how we work? What's next? What's next? What's next? Now, the interesting thing on this diagram is you don't want to end up here or here or here. And what that basically is saying to you is that you have these moments in time to nail it. And the strategic planning process is one of those moments in time. And if you miss the next thing that's coming, if you miss the way in which the field is evolving. If you miss the signals from the emerging markets, you're going to end up behind the eight ball. You're going to end up out of time to make the kind of innovations, to make the kind of course corrections that are necessary for you to be competitive. So I want to first introduce this whole concept that good strategic planning is all about how we think. Now let's begin to talk
Lori?
a little bit more.
Hi, Lori. Before you move on, I just wanted, we got a really interesting question here. At FedCap, how do we go about determining and identifying the next thing? Because it's not the easiest thing. Obviously, it doesn't exist.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much. Well, one of the ways that we go about identifying the next thing is to have our ear to the ground. It is a responsibility of every single one of us in our individual roles to understand what you see as an evolving practice. If I'm in IT, I better know what the new trends are in the market to position us to be able to access and tap those new trends. If I am an expert in workforce development or child welfare or services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, I probably knew, for example, that the push was going to come against having individuals work inside of sheltered workshops and move into integrated employment. If I didn't have my ear to the ground because there were percolating lawsuits and messages from the Justice Department. If I am an individual who is, let's say, part of a learning collaborative, part of a think tank, am I paying attention to the policy papers that are coming out? Am I aware of what the trends are in terms of services to, let's say, immigrants or services to the previously incarcerated or justice involved? I think that in order to understand the next thing, we have to absolutely understand and be students of our profession. If we're not students of our profession, if we don't understand the evolution of the marketplace and the demands of the marketplace in terms of both nonprofit and for-profit, we're going to be left behind. I also want to emphasize that last section on for-profit. Everyone probably is aware that the for-profit marketplace is moving right into the not-for-profit marketplace. On any RFP, it is very likely that we are going to be competing with for-profit companies as well as not-for-profit companies. So pay attention to what those those for-profit companies are doing and saying and thinking. Be spending time talking to them. Be spending time talking to people who are talking to them. So it sounds simplistic, but it's not. Having our ear to the ground and being a student of our profession and fundamentally being so curious about what's over the next hill is a responsibility of every single person in the agency. And that's how we don't get left behind. Thanks, Stephen. So one of the things, in addition to this way of thinking, is that a strategic plan is informed by our history. And I have a lot on this slide. I may not go to every bit of it, but let me first start by emphasizing that we were an organization that was launched in 1935. And between 1935 and 2010, we did a small amount of things brilliantly. We were probably one of the most reputable AbilityOne providers in the country, and we had very precise business lines. We were a master in home health and have about a 40, 50, 60-year history in that. We served people deeply, and when people came to work for us, they got a living wage salary, they were able to buy a house, send their kids to college. That's the way in which we functioned for a lot of years. And equally as important, we led the fight for ADA. We led the fight for AbilityOne, which sets aside 15% of state and federal contracts to be served or to be actually operationalized by organizations serving people with disabilities, and to ensure that the people that are doing the work are people that have disabilities. So we were leaders, and that's an important legacy that we spend a lot of time talking about. We want to advance that legacy. Now, in 2010, the world changed. Obviously, it's because our beloved Christine McMahon came on the scene, and she brought with her, an orientation to the work. And everyone's heard the phrase, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. She brought that orientation. And so in 2010, we launched our 2015 strategic plan, and we had very precise drivers around growth, whether they were organic growth or whether it was mergers and acquisition growth. That was really the heart and soul of when we began to say that if we're doing something and we're doing it well and it's making a difference, then don't we have almost a moral obligation to expand what we're doing? Also in 2010 was our first gala. Now, in 2011, we began this process of mergers and acquisitions, and FedCap School in New Jersey came to us. Wildcat Service Corp came to us. The Way to Work came to us. We launched our Solution Series. We had our first career design school graduation. And now we get into the 2013 and 2014. We brought in Reserve. One might say, what in the world did Reserve have to do with who we were as an organization? But just think about, that was a brilliant idea launched by 3 social entrepreneurs who decided that there was a massive demographic shift happening in this country, and those individuals who were part of that shift had brains, had talent, had skills, and they wanted to give back. And let's find a way to serve our fellow nonprofits, to serve our government partners through Reservice. Community Work Services came on board. We began our work in Rhode Island under first TTP and then under CWS Rhode Island. We won Region Care, Region 2. We implemented Oracle. We launched Metrics That Matter. And now, here we are. We made it to 2015. Easter Seals New York came on board. We Care Region 1 came to us through a series of unpredictable circumstances. We won a $1.5 million grant from Hilton to launch Prep Now, a real entree into the child welfare platform. We engaged Granite Pathways and now have our footprint in substance use disorder and mental health. We reached all milestones in our 2015 strategic plan. Just think about that. We actually exceeded every goal that we set for our 2015 strategic plan. We launched our financial release, and still to this day, we believe we're the only one in the country that is doing that kind of a transparent release. And in 16 and 17, Single Stop came to us. We won Breaking the Cycle in Maine. We engaged the Dixon Center. We hit the milestone of serving over 100,000 people across our footprint. We launched FedCap Cares technology, which is going to soon be agency-wide, and I believe will be a remarkable, I think, addition to all of the technological services that we have in place. And finally, in 2018, we've engaged MVLE, and as of July 1, Easter Seals Central Texas, Easter Seals Northern Texas, and we hit another milestone, serving over 200,000 people. One can't ignore that history in designing a strategic plan. Now,
Lori,
our plan...
Can I just stop you? We have some
Sure.
interesting questions. One, that's definitely related to We Care and contracts. This person quoted Chris, the day we get a contract is the day we plan to lose it. Really, really interesting. And given that much of what we do is reliant on contracts, what does that look like in a strategic plan?
I love that question. Thank you so much for it. So it would be foolish for us to underappreciate the changing dynamics in government funding. We have moved, as I mentioned, we have moved from basically cost reimbursement to performance milestones, and we are slowly evolving into managed care, which will mean that we'll be under risk arrangements most likely. And so when Chris makes a statement, the first thing that we do when we get a contract is planned for the day when that contract ends, means that every aspect of our strategic planning process needs to have those kinds of sunset loops built into the dates. If this is a 6-year contract, and we launched it basically in year 1 of our strategic plan, then we know that in year 2 of our next strategic plan, we had already better be prepared for that to sunset, and we should have been backfilling the entire 5 years. And we do that by winning additional government contracts or by diversifying and ensuring that we have a balance of foundations and government funding and donations. But most importantly is that we are smart enough and sharp enough and informed enough to ensure that if the government is moving in a direction, we know it before they go there. We know it because we are serious students of policy. And so I think that's the way I think about managing contracts within a strategic plan. You are constantly aware in the planning process of what are the big things that are potentially leaving you and how are you filling them with the new market environment. And it's not easy. It's not easy to be that kind of a predictor of the future, to have that kind of a crystal ball, but it's easier if you are informed and you have your ear to the ground and you are absolutely a student. And so while it may not be the greatest and most enjoyable reading in the world, we need to be reading about the trends of our profession. And we need to be innovating as we see those trends. And I'll talk about the idea of innovation for just a moment. One of the things that we see a lot in the social service arena, and it breaks our heart, is that people fall through the proverbial cracks. And when they fall through those cracks, it's not very challenging to track back and see why they fell through, what happened, what was missed. It's pretty simple to see it. And so our challenge, the one that I lay out to all of you, is that we know where those cracks are. And our job is to be creating innovations that fill those cracks. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to create an entirely new service system, but we do need to create innovative, precise interventions where we see the cracks so that they are filled up and that we are able to ensure that when people are served, they're served fully and wholly. Thank you.
I have another actually big question as well. Is it okay to interrupt you, Lori?
It's absolutely okay.
Okay, you just tell me when to stop. This is a real interesting question. In what ways do we specifically work to influence systems, so political or specific practice areas? And then how do we factor that into our own planning?
I love that. And in fact, it is a perfect segue to the slide that I have in front of me. So I'm going to go through that slide because I'm going to answer that question while going through it. When you're doing a good strategic plan, you are asking important questions of the service system, of the environment, of the funding streams. And let me talk about some of the important questions that we posed in our 2015 to 2020 strategic planning process about the very systems that we want to change. So question number 1, after extraordinary efforts and billions of dollars, 9 out of 10 children in our child welfare system who enter college fail and drop out, and 74% by the age of 25 end up homeless, jobless, in prison, or pregnant. Now, we pose that question because if the systems that serve the same individuals that we serve, and in fact our referral sources, are so effective, these kinds of outcomes wouldn't be in existence. And so the question that we posed is, why? What's wrong with the way the system is structured? What's wrong with the way that people experience the system? What's wrong with the flow of the system, and where can we precisely intervene? Next question. 95% of individuals of working age with significant disabilities are unemployed. Why? We know and we have a track record of demonstrating that people with disabilities can work side by side as partners. Maybe they don't have, some may not have the exact level of productivity, but they bring many, many other things to the environment. What is it about the way that the service system is structured that results in those kinds of outcomes? What about the flow? What about the way in which people are hired and taught about doing the work within the system? What's wrong? Or how about this one? 67% of the people released from prison are rearrested within 3 years despite spending in billions on well-researched and proven models of reintegration. Something isn't working in the process of reintegration. What is it? What is it that's not working? And we tend to have some thoughts about every single one of these, and those thoughts began to inform our strategy. Why is it that 14.5% of the population in the U.S. living below poverty live below poverty, even though all of the government fighting programs exist? Why? Why is that the case today? And finally, after billions of dollars and millions of performance-based outcomes achieved, a huge portion of public assistance recipients are still dependent on public assistance 5 and 10 years later. What's that about? So you have this set of questions that challenge the very core of the systems within which we work. And you say, if things were working as well as we intended, as well as I think people think they're working, these outcomes would not exist. And so what's wrong? And how can we shift the systems? And so the answer to the question is you ask the right questions about what's wrong with the systems, and then it informs the planning by saying, you know what? I believe that we can change the unemployment rate of people with disabilities by aligning ourselves differently with businesses, by expecting that at age 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, when kids are in high school, they are being trained not to go into the adult system, but being trained to go into a job or to go to college, just like we train and expect of our own children. We believe that if 67% of the people released are rearrested within 3 years, something isn't tethering them to the community, and we think it's employment. We think that employment is a missing piece, so we focus our work on finding ways that businesses think differently. We do a better job of preparing individuals. We do a better job of supporting individuals, and we ensure that when they come out into a support system, into work readiness training, into a job, and into a supportive employment environment. So I can keep going on with this, but I think you see the link between the right kind of questions that are zeroing in on very flawed outcomes by our systems, and then we design solutions that focus on changing those outcomes. So what I'd like to do now is show you how we did that in our 2020 plan. So just to recap, in 2010 to 2015, we had a goal of impacting the lives of 25,000 people. We wanted to have $150 million in revenue, and we wanted to create 2,500 jobs, and we did every single one of those things. In fact, we created 3,700 jobs, and we impacted nearly 50,000 people's lives. So we more than met our goals. Okay, so then we sat down and said, now we're thinking about where we want to be in 2020. And remember those outcomes. The first thing we said is that we are going to design and deliver precise treatments that change the long-term outcomes of targeted populations. Individuals of working age with significant disabilities are going to be employed at the same rate as their peers. We are going to ensure that individuals leaving prison obtain and maintain employment. We are going to ensure that people on public assistance, once trained and placed in jobs, obtain long-term economic well-being, and part of that is career ladders. Part of that is ongoing education. We are going to work our tails off to ensure that every single child in this country lives above the poverty level. And we are going to work to create precise interventions that demonstrate how to ensure that young kids leaving foster care have the same college and graduation entrance and graduation rates as their peers. So that's the first thing we did. And I want to point out something that's pretty bold about this. We didn't just say for the people that walk through our doors. We said that we want the outcomes across this country to change. Why? Back to the question, that smart question that was asked, because we are trying to influence systems in how they think, in how they deliver services, in how they organize services. And then we said that we're going to build our infrastructure capacity, and that's certainly something we're still doing because we knew our infrastructure capacity was going to be burdened by our growth. We also said that we wanted to have a $30 million endowment. Why does that matter? What does that even mean? When we launched the 2010 plan and began to move toward the goals achieved in 2015, it was during that period of time that we began to explore moving from our 14th Street address to Midtown. And when we did that, you cannot imagine the look on our faces when we found out what our building was worth on 14th Street. And that enabled us to do amazing things. And it was a legacy that Milt Cohen and our leaders prior to Christine and board members gave us, and we want to give back. So by 2020, we want to at least have a $30 million endowment. And then we want to be, again, to that very smart question, a major influencer of national and international policy in pursuit of economic well-being. And we believe that the secret to that is education and jobs, and we want to promote that, but not doing what everybody else is doing, because most people are doing it as well as they know how. Let's figure out something different to do, something that's more precise. So let me give you an example of that. And some have heard this example before, but I think it's a good one and bears repeating. The reason that children who are in foster care age out of foster care to joblessness and to homelessness, and they don't end up going to college at the same rate as their peers or graduating at the same rate of their peers, is because, first of all, they don't graduate high school at the same rate as their peers. And in fact, they don't graduate middle school at the same rate as their peers. And one of the reasons that occurs is because there is no, in many instances, in most instances, single cheerleader that says your education is one of the most important investments of your life, and I am going to help you succeed any way you know how. Now, there's a lot of programs that are specifically focused on kids, helping them maybe fill out a FAFSA form or helping them write their personal essay for college. Or maybe there's programs that try to intervene in chronic truancy in middle school and in high school. But our research and our conversations with 500, 600 foster parents told us that not one foster parent thought it was their job, not one thought it was their job to advance the education of kids in their care. Nobody had thought of that. That is the whole heart and soul of Prep Now. It's been designed to help foster parents instill this aspirational thinking about going to college and graduating. It's inspired to help foster parents have all the tools and all the resources in order to help kids in their care succeed academically. It teaches them how to be an advocate. It teaches them how to understand what are the motivators, what are the drivers that make kids believe in themselves. That is a precise intervention that is already changing the graduation rates, not only for the kids that we're serving, but the graduation rates are slowly ramping up. Is Prep Now the sole reason? No. But is Prep Now one of the reasons? You bet. And we're proud of that. We're proud that we have begun to move that needle. And then we want to have...
Lori, before you go on, a really interesting question I think that falls within this period. The world is a dynamic place. Things are changing all over policy. We have new governments and so on and so forth. How do we address that in the structure that we've created for our plan? And do you have an example of something that's happened that's been so significant that we went out to address it outside of maybe what we were planning to do?
I think that's that's a great question. And I think it ties to everything else that we've been saying. And I'll give you an example of it. And it's really it's a future trend that we have our eyes, right on the prize. And that's the idea of managed care, basically now starting to cover populations that previously were carved out of a managed care model. So many of you know that many of the individuals that we serve receive their health care through Medicaid. And as I said, you might have children with disabilities, or you might have individuals with significant mental health issues. And these individuals that have their health care covered under Medicaid were carved out of the managed care contracts that most states utilize to fund individuals that are impoverished. The populations that we serve were served inside the government system as opposed to within the managed care system. And that's changing. We don't know where it's going. We aren't exactly sure how it's changing, but I can say this, that in 2015, when we became aware that this was happening, at least at a conversational level, more and more, we brought in an expert, and she now is partnered, she's now one of our team members, Robin Fisk, who's an expert in healthcare policy, to talk with us at many of our corporate sessions about the concept of managed care and how managed care will impact the service delivery to vulnerable populations that heretofore had been served within the government system, and we serve them through contracts, direct contracts. It started out with the Managed Care 101, and then it moved into deeper and deeper and deeper to the point that just this past spring, East Seals, Central Texas, combined with the support of the entire FedCap family of agencies, was helped develop and written into a proposal to actually serve this carved-out population within a managed care environment. So we went from hearing about it in 2014, probably 13 and 14, to bringing in experts to teach us more about it in 2015 and 16, to being able to actually position ourselves to be part of an RFP response in 2018. That's the way you move from, what is this thing I'm hearing about, to now we are a player. Great question. And then the last two aspects I'll just finish in our strategic plan is that we wanted to have a robust community development, economic development platform, meaning, and this is really important, that we wanted to have a way in which people could achieve equity in loaning. One of the things that we know is that veterans, for example, who come home with PTSD, may or may not want to work within the confines of a typical environment. They may want to be self-employed, and they have no access to the kind of startup money that it takes. Or a person with a disability may not want to choose or may not be able to work inside of some form of a corporate setting, but has their own idea for how to launch some form of a new business. We want to ensure that vulnerable populations, whatever and however they might be framed, have equity to access to funding. And that's our goal for the economic development platform. And finally, by 2030, we want a $100 million endowment. We want to ensure that this organization, when we leave, has long-term sustainability. Nobody has to worry about it going under. And that's really the heart and soul of our 2020 strategic plan. Now, there's a nuance to this strategy that I started to introduce, and let me introduce more. When we think about strategic planning and the way that we think about it, the approach sends a very interesting set of messages to both our staff and our stakeholders. If I was in a room with all of you and I said, how many of you have been a part of possibly the most boring strategic planning process in the world? I bet 95% of your hands would be raised. And that's because the plan was boring. The plan wasn't inspired. It wasn't, it didn't reach out and say, we're going to change the world. It basically said, we're going to do what we do, maybe tweak it a little more, maybe to do it to slightly different populations, but, we're going to maintain our course. And it had a set of timelines, and it had a set of deliverables, and then it went on the shelf. You've heard that a million times. And we are, as an organization, fundamentally opposed to even the concept that a strategic plan can sit in a shelf. Because a strategic plan makes a statement about the kind of company we are by how creative it is, by how innovative it is, by the way in which it is bold and far-reaching. So I won't ever forget that when we made our presentation to the board, after having tons of interviews with them, tons of surveys disseminated to them, and to many, many stakeholders and to staff, we, laid it all out before them. And the first thing we said to them is that this isn't going to look anything like our 2010 to 2015 plan. That was great, but it was flat. We said it, we had a set of goals, and we met those goals. What this is going to do is establish a set of bold goals that we probably can't even reach, and combined with a set of directions and tactics. And we're going to build those based on our predictions of the future, but you know what? We're going to be flexible enough to evolve. So we've got a direction in mind, and it's bold, such as we are going to change the outcomes of people that never even walk through our door. And that's based on a set of predictions about the way we think policy is moving, the way we think markets are moving, the way we think funding is moving. But we could be wrong, and then we'll shift it. And that in the past, we said to the board and stakeholders and staff, we've had to defend if we departed from the plan. Well, wait a minute, that's not in our plan. But this plan is built on an expectation of departing from it. It's built on an expectation of evolving thinking, and if you're going to evolve your thinking, you're most likely going to evolve your doing. And it shifts, and this is the piece I keep emphasizing, from only measuring internal numbers to measuring both internal and external metrics. Now, when we laid that one out before the board, there was almost this deadly silence. And then there was, how are you going to do that? And it began to be the beginning of the conversations that we've had with the board from that point forward. We talked with them in great detail about the kinds of precise interventions that we posited could make the kind of changes that we expected. And now the board expects us to be cutting edge. The board expects us to innovate. They expect that we will be doing something that we hadn't even talked about 3 years ago. They expect it. And in fact, if we're not doing it, they think we might be off our game.
Lori,
so
sorry, I'm getting a lot of questions. Could you elaborate?
No, that's fine. Let's stop it. Let's do some questions.
A lot of questions on how. Could you elaborate on what a flat plan is? I think that.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a great question. A flat plan is that which you do, let's say, a traditional SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and you lay them out, and from there you generate a set of activities with a set of deliverables, and then you expect that that is the plan that's going to drive you, as you designed it, through the entire strategic planning process. That's flat. It really doesn't have any movement within it. It doesn't have an expectation of movement within it. And it's the reason that it so rapidly became obsolete. I expect that some of you may be wondering, why do most strategic plans fail? And I'm guessing, Stephen, that might be one of the questions. And they fail because they fail to take into consideration that administrations change, which dramatically influences policy, that it dramatically influences funding, that foundations end up having a whole strategic planning session and actually change direction. That the market shifts mean that for-profit starts to enter the not-for-profit market, that there are a different kind of a demand for data than there's ever been before. And if that happens within your flat strategic planning period and you don't, immediately adjust, course correct, shift the way in which you're thinking what's new, what's next, you'll be left behind. And that's what we call a flat plan. Great question.
Great. Just one more. Is that all right? Actually,
absolutely.
2 more. I'm going to fit in 2 more since we have the time. I know that we're talking more about measuring impact, but what types of metrics are we using to do that?
Not enough. We do not have an agency-wide client management system. And thank heavens for all our colleagues at WeCare building and leveraging that contract to give us FedCap Cares. And over time, FedCap Cares will, I believe, become our overarching, I don't know this, it's my prediction, but probably cover a good 85% of the programs that we serve. It's robust enough and it's flexible enough. So I think that maybe the best way to think about trying to figure out the exact, most precise language. I think the best way to think about the way in which we are, positioning ourselves and thinking about the direction that we're taking is that we are conscious of the fact that you can't tell a story without data. So you saw in the history that we launched Metrics That Matter in 2013, and we have 16 volumes of Metrics That Matter. And we have a massive amount of data that's being collected in WeCare, and we have data that's being collected in almost every single brand and practice area and to some extent region. And we've increasingly dissected our Metrics That Matter around various lenses. What are we doing from a practice area perspective? What's it look like from a brand perspective? What do our outcomes look like from a regional perspective? And the more that we do that and the more granular we get in our analysis, the more we realize we don't know all that we don't know. And I'll give a couple of examples. I think we can tell a very good story about educational advancement and a very good story about job placement. I think we can tell a less impressive story about retention, certainly after 1 year, and we can tell a less impressive story about the whole concept of moving from one educational level to another educational level. I think we can give you some information or give our donors and our funders some information about career projection, but not as much as we need to be able to give. In 2013, when we all sat down in a large room and we were, as an organization, much, much smaller, we identified a set of indicators that we thought, if a person has well-being, if they have these things, if they have a safe place to live, if they can pay their bills, if they have a little bit of money in savings, and if they can pick up the phone and call somebody when they're desperate for support. If I have those elements, I don't have, I don't have everything, but I have a lot. I have enough to say that I'm at least some level of self-sufficiency. Now, we decided at that time to begin to collect that data, but still to this day, not every program collects information about those 4 indicators. Part of it is because we have so many new programs that are coming on, and each one has to design ways in which to capture those kind of indicator information. Plus, I think it's difficult to capture information outside of what is required. It's one of the reasons we established the concept of metrics that matter. Now, we're not where we need to be, but we have said that we know what the kinds of data that really matter, and sometimes government isn't asking us to capture them. Foundations aren't asking them to capture them, but we should do it. It should be internally driven, not externally driven. So, you know, I want to say as clearly as I can, are we much further along than we were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago? Yes. Are we as far as we need to be? Absolutely not. Thank you.
Okay, and the last question, and I'll let you move on, Lori. It's about growth and how it's, you know, the growth of the agency as we are growing rapidly, and how that factored into the 2030 plan.
Well, we don't have a 2030 plan yet. We don't.
Yeah,
into the
plan.
Into the 2020 plan.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Do you notice that that there's two areas in which growth, and I'll use that term with quotes around it, mattered in the 2020 plan? As you notice, we took a seismic leap from a $60 million agency to a $150 million agency in our 2015 plan. We more than doubled. We did not expect that by 2020. We didn't expect to double or more than double. What we did know that we had to do in terms of growth is we knew that WeCare was going to be undoubtedly ending at the tail of this strategic planning process, and we needed to backfill with other contracts. We knew that. We also knew that we had to invest incredibly in infrastructure. And when you're investing in infrastructure, that is why the different companies that come into the family have a 12% admin rate. That is the way in which we fund infrastructure. So growth, if you want to use that term, was predicated on two hypotheses. One, that we need to get new business in to supplant the WeCare business that we predict is going to end at the end of 2019. And we need to build the number of companies that we have so that we can expand our infrastructure to meet our real core needs. So those are really the ways in which growth, I think, entered into the conversation. And one last way it did. In the 2020 plan, we talked about international presence. And so growth wasn't necessarily financial growth or even serving more people. It was, hey, there's places in other parts of this world that need the way in which we do our work. They need that at their fingertips. And so let's expand our footprint, another way in which we thought about growth. Make sense? Okay. Okay, Stephen, I'll go on from here.
Please do.
So the foundations of building a strategic plan. Let's begin to talk about what they are. And we're talking about a plan, not a flat plan, not a boring plan, but a plan that has the potential to change the world. So first of all, you have to establish your drivers. What are the drivers of the plan? Now remember, in 2010 to 2015, one of the major drivers was growth. No question about it. If you're not growing, you're shrinking, and we were at a real tough point in terms of revenue. 60 million is tough to make it in this kind of a demanding environment where costs are going up all of the time. So that was a real big driver in the 2010-2015. In 2015 to 2020, the drivers were to begin to change systems, to begin to influence the way people thought about the work, and to design precise interventions to change the world, to design precise interventions to change the outcomes, to ensure that systems were listening to us. So you notice that one of the things that we've done a lot more of in terms of visibility is our solution series. They are about thought leadership. They're about introducing people to a new way of thinking about maybe different kinds of problems, or they're about introducing problems, laying them out, and then beginning to brainstorm on what needs to be different. And I think that's important. The other thing we did during this period that raised our profile was we launched our financial release. Now, and that was launched exactly at the end of our 2015 plan. Why did we do that? Not only because we have an amazing board member in Lynn Morgan who had the idea, but because when you're the only nonprofit in the country that's releasing your information in that way, in a public forum, not a 990 that's probably 18 months to 24 years old by the time it gets actually published. But we're laying it out for the world to see twice a year. This is how we're doing well. This is how we're doing not so well. This is what we're trying to change. This is how we're succeeding. This is how we're struggling. So laying it out to our stakeholders. So those were our drivers. Excuse me for a second. What are our drivers going to be for the 2025 plan? I have not a clue. I have some ideas because of the constant emerging market language and trends and, some of the changing realities. But we don't know yet. And I don't even want to presume to guess, because I imagine that the rapid pace of the environmental changes will make me a liar the moment that I say them. I do know this: they will not be to do the same things in the same ways, only just more of it. It will not be that. It will be to change outcomes for people with barriers to economic well-being. So you establish the drivers, lots of conversations go into those drivers. And then, as I've talked about, you deeply understand your current environment. You don't just have a cursory knowledge of your current environment. You deeply understand who's succeeding, who's getting the awards for the contracts, and why. And if somebody gets an award that we wanted, man, do we try hard to get their response. What kind of recognizance can we do to find out what they said that we didn't say? We want to very much understand, and this is tough, who do we imagine is going to be in leadership positions at the city, at the state, at the federal government? And you need to have almost a scenario understanding of the environment. If this kind of policy thinking person wins, this is potentially where it's going to go. If this kind of a policy thinking person wins, this is where it's going to go. So it is not simply, I understand what's happening, let me pick a guess, in the area of criminal justice reform. No, we don't have a clue where the world of criminal justice reform is going, and we're pretty steeped in it now. But it will shift on a dime based on the policy and based on funding. And I tend to think, I might be wrong about this, but I tend to think we'll get to a tipping point because of how much it's costing us. Money does strange things, doesn't it? And we spend more than any country, certainly in the world, in incarceration. And part of that has to track back to policy positions that were made, 3 strikes and you're out, zero tolerance, some of these things. So are there emerging policy shifts that could influence in that way, and might they actually move us away from incarceration? We've got to understand where the positions are emerging, and that's very complicated. And in addition to understanding the current policy environment, we have to understand the financing environment. Now, we have been on a pendulum swinging course between cost-based reimbursement, as I said, and then we move into performance-based reimbursement, and then sometimes the system goes back to cost-based reimbursement, and then actually we might end up in a risk environment. And I said that phrase pretty rapidly last time. If we end up in a risk environment, this is what it means. It means that we enter into contracts where we agree to serve a certain number of individuals for, and this is one way to think about risk, it's a simple way to describe it, for a certain cost, expecting a certain set of outcomes. In fact, it is predicated upon us to expect a certain set of outcomes because outside of those outcomes, our costs might go up. And so just imagine what it takes in terms of reserves, in terms of utilization review, in terms of every aspect of cost management to operate within a risk-based environment. That's not something we know how to do yet. We think we understand the concept. We don't know how to operate within it yet. Will we? I suspect we will. And I suspect we'll do it well, but we're not there yet. Then we need to understand the what's next thinking. And I've started to allude to that, but there's more. What is next that we have not yet imagined? And if we've not yet imagined it, then let's get on the ball and let's start to think about our service system, our service design system, and the way in which we can develop precise interventions to make a distinction that says we know how to do this work. Now, maybe the what's next thinking will be solely technological. I don't think so, but let's give you an example. We have a wonderful company that became a part of us in February of last year called Single Stop. Single Stop is a poverty-fighting engine, and their commitment is to try to get individuals to access whatever kind of government benefits they might be eligible for to help ensure that individuals are eating, they have a place to live, they have health care, all the kinds of things that we think are so important. So now, let's think about that for a moment. Single Stop had a distribution methodology that was very much dependent on our partnerships with community-based organizations around the city and even around the country. We have an idea that if we design Single Stop 2.0 in the right way, you will bump into a kiosk in every Walgreens, every CVS, every Walmart, every Target that allows people to determine the kind of eligibility they have for certain kinds of government programs and literally walks them through the process of application. It is a potential that could be explosive in terms of the number of families who have access to let's say, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, or food stamps, as it was called before. That's the kind of innovation that we're contemplating now. We're trying to figure out the mechanisms and the steps for operationalizing it. We're not there yet, but if in fact we get there, and I have lots of confidence that we'll get there, what does this mean for other programs and services that we deliver? Are there ways to leverage technology that we haven't thought about yet? What next thinking?
Lori,
and then
sorry, before you move on, I have a practical question actually about the new ideas, innovation thinking. Someone's asking, what is the best way for us as frontline staff to offer ideas that might be considered in a strategic plan? Where would you go with that? Yeah.
So this is a way, that's great, and let me tell you what we're going to do this year. We did it in the 2015 plan, and we're going to do it bigger and smarter and sharper in the 2020 to 2025 plan. We are going to develop, and in fact, I just had a conversation launching it this morning, an interactive web-based platform that poses a lot of questions and allows individuals to give answers and then measures those answers in real time, as well as to analyze the narrative and then come up with certain conclusions around what people are saying. So the web, it will not be like a SurveyMonkey. It will truly be an interactive web-based platform survey, and that's one way. The second way is through the focus group methodology, but we'll undoubtedly use webinar technology for that so we can reach the broadest number of individuals. Third, we'll be inviting people to have to submit position papers on where they think we should go and why. What is what does your research tell us about the next best thing and the next thing and the next thing, and you would become our educators. In addition, we have launched the Innovation Garage, and some of you that are on this call are a part of the Innovation Garage, and they have helped think through this amazing set of recommendations for onboarding. We will use it for other areas, focused areas, such as performance evaluations. We may use it for other strategic communications, and we will use the Innovation Garage for the strategic planning process. So there will be a mechanism whereby people come together and get lots of information from the field that folds into our knowledge about where they think we should take the organization. So we've begun to develop these kinds of staff engagement processes. But by the way, if during the call and at the end of the call you have another mechanism, zip it on to Stephen and he'll get it to me. Okay? And then the final foundation of building a strategic plan is smart strategy and clear tactics. That's fundamentally critical. Our strategy has to be smart, well-informed, researched, and the way that we go about it is precise, and it is measurable, but not measurable to the point that, did I do this activity at this point in time? No. Did we, in fact, begin to influence the national conversation as measured by? That's the kind of tactical measurement that we want to put in place. Okay, let's keep going on at this juncture. Now, I want to outline for you our 2025 strategic planning process. So the first element of it is really, we've talked about it to some extent, but let me highlight. We are going to have to start to identify the emerging realities. And so not only did we talk about new funding structures, but are there changes in the financing and bond market that might influence some of the way in which we invest our monies, our endowment? One of the major struggles that organizations are having across the country today is that of talent acquisition. It's a difficult environment in the fact that there's such low unemployment rate, and there's probably a much higher demand for skilled technological resources than we have available, I'm going to suggest, in this country. So talent acquisition is a big deal. And what are we going to do about it? If we see an emerging trend and we don't have brilliance in the field around this, we have to bring that brilliance in, or we have to contract with that brilliance, or we have to have some sort of a consulting arrangement with that brilliance. But we have to have it in-house. By that I mean available to us. What about the new use of space? How is space and the utilization of space going to change the way in which we work? We have a lot of conversations about the use of virtual technological strategies to bring people together in our Leadership Academy. Are there more and increasing technological advances that can actually make teams much, much more integrated, even though they're spread across the country? And so does space become virtual, just the way we think about it? Do we stop even thinking about offices per se, and we start thinking about integration of people through technology? And then the evidence-based practices are they're coming out left and right and up and down, but we should have our own. What's happening out there, but what do we know about what we do? And what's happening out there, how does that marry with what we are demonstrating in terms of our own success, our own evidence? And if there's evidence-based practices out there that are highly effective, are we doing them? And do we even know about them? And then what about strategic alliances, such as our alliance with a managed care company to respond to an RFP? Are there more of those? Are we, in fact, going to be partnering with government? One thing I suspect we will be doing more of is instead of responding to an RFP, you know what we want to do? We want to help the government write the RFP. It's okay if we can't respond to it, we can help take our good, creative, brilliant ideas that we see being effective and get those strategies embedded in the RFP, and then we change lives, thousands and thousands and thousands of lives, because the systems are designed in the way that actually make much more sense and have an optimal chance of improving outcomes. So we're going to be involved in identifying the emerging realities. We're also going to be doing the things that we call discovery. I talked about the interactive survey, talked about focus groups with the board, and we have such a smart board, and they challenge us all the time with ideas and ways of thinking. We're going to interact with our staff, and you know, we do not do the kind of interaction that we need to with our donors, but we will. And what are our other stakeholders out there? You know, we contract with about 6,700 businesses or at least place individuals in about 6,700 businesses. It might even be closer to 7,500 if you look at our full footprint. Those businesses have something to say about the work that we do, and we're going to learn about it. And then there's businesses that we don't interact with, but boy, are they at the top of their game in terms of thought leadership. We're going to get people to get us in front of McKinsey, get people to get us in front of businesses that are sort of setting the world on fire, whether it be automotive, whether it be electrical, whether it be manufacturing. We're going to get in front of high-level policymakers, even individuals that are not high-level now but were, and have a very good insight into what's happening or might be. And then we're going to look at case studies of nonprofits and for-profits that have been incredibly successful. And then we're going to take all of that information and we're going to analyze it and we're going to focus it. And we're going to begin to, out of that analytical process, out of that dissection and, you know, peeling back the onion from all that information, it's amazing how a direction emerges. The focus narrows, and then you begin to lay out, this is where we're going, this is what we're tackling, this is what we'll be in 2025. Okay. Stephen, before I go on, any additional questions at this time?
Yes, actually. One about risk and how it's factored in as well to planning. Being that, you know, it's like blue sky or trying to get some great ideas together, risk, you know, puts a damper on that.
Well, it shouldn't, but people might think that it does. And I'm talking about financial risk in some degree. I'm not talking about reputational risk. And remember, this is one thing that we've, as an organization, this is an orientation that we have adopted. We do not want to be one that rejects risk. We just want to manage it well. We do not want to be risk averse. We just want to be smart about how we think about the concept of risk. And I think the most important thing to say about that is that risk is every single person's job. Risk management is every single person's job. Reputational risk is as important to me as it is to any other person in the organization. Nobody has sort of owns the responsibility for reputational risk. We all do. But when in the context of taking on risk in a financial arrangement, we're actually taking on the financial relationship between what it costs us to serve and what we get paid. So we'll say that we will serve 25,000 people for this amount of money, no more, no less, and achieve these kinds of outcomes. Now, sometimes risk arrangements have outcomes required, sometimes they don't. But the most important thing is there's no more money. You get a certain amount of money and you serve people within that amount of money to achieve a set of outcomes. That's generally and very, very broadly and not a sophisticated definition of a risk environment. That's what I mean by risk. And so I think it's exciting. I think it means that we better have our cash managed. We better be able to manage the ups and downs of financial responsibilities. It means that if you're going to manage cash, then you are on top of your AR. You are absolutely in constant contact with your funders who are ensuring that that you get paid in a timely way, and that's a problem, but it's something that has to happen if we're going to manage it. And more important, maybe not more importantly, equally important than both of those, is at any given point in time you have to know exactly where you are in terms of money, exactly where you are in terms of deliverables, exactly where you are in terms of accrued, exactly where you are in terms of any cost item. You cannot run or operate within a financial risk environment by back of the napkin management. You have to be as precise as is humanly possible. I get excited about that because I think we have the intellect and the capacity to do it. I'm not sure we have the structure in place to do it yet, but we're not taking this on tomorrow. We're building to that structure. And so when you hear Chris talk about structure, good people fail in the absence of structure. What is your structure? How are you organizing yourself to be successful? That's what we mean. How are we organizing ourselves to be able to manage in a variety of different environments, including ones that where we bear financial risk? So I get excited about it because when you are, not always, but when you are in a financial risk environment, you are not micromanaged for how you serve. And that's the trade-off. Give me the money, give me the expectations, and let me do it the way I want to do it. Again, I am stating that about as simplistically as possible, but it's the benefit of operating within a risk environment. The last thing you want to do is get a certain amount of money, and that's all, and be told to have these deliverables, and then be told how to get those deliverables. Not happening. We will not work in that kind of an environment. But what an idea that we don't have to report in every jot and tittle that we have to do, every single process, but we report on the creativity, how the creative ways in which we serve people result in a whole different set of outcomes. That excites me. Okay. So now let's move on to the ongoing process. Let's say we've designed this plan. We're at the point where we've got very clear direction. Our analysis has pointed us towards our North Star, and they're big and they're bold directions. We never stop evaluating the changes in the marketplace, never. There's a whole bunch of people today that are at the British, it's the BAB, the British, somebody will think of the name of it as I forget it right now, but this British Council is got their ear to the ground of not only what's happening in the UK, but what's happening in the States. And we have some board members that are active in the British Council. And we go to those things. We participate in think tanks. We bring people in to talk to us. Excuse me for a second. You might see, all of you, the Wednesday Morning Buzz. Those are articles that Chris reads and says, hey, this is important. This actually is something that matters to me. This is what I think we need to be paying attention to. And then probably 5, 6, 7 times a week, I get articles from other colleagues saying, check out this. Look what this is saying. See how this person is thinking about it. We are evaluating changes in the marketplace. We are paying very close attention to language coming out of federal and state government. And they're cueing us into the direction that they're moving. And we're paying very close attention to that language, that kind of direction that signals there's a change in policy, there's a change in funding, there's a change in expectations in practice. And you almost have to be a student of those RFPs to see those nuanced shifts. And I promise you this, if language is coming out within RFPs and we don't understand the nuances of that language and we write our responses with old information, we'll lose. We'll lose. So we need to spend a fair amount of time dissecting what do they mean when they start to talk about economic equity? Big one. Big body of language coming out about equity. What do they mean about that? I understand the concept of economic equity at the high level, but what does that mean in terms of a practice orientation? How do we position ourselves as an organization that advances economic equity? Is a job enough? Well, we've been doing that for a long time, and I'm not positive people have achieved economic equity. In fact, I would suggest that they haven't. Is it about career ladders? It might be that. Is it about access to seed money through CDFIs? We think so. And so we're pushing and looking so hard to try to partner or combine with the CDFI, which stands for Community Development Financial Institute, that does the kind of lending that I was talking about. Or does it actually mean that we work within neighborhoods and create equity of access to every possible kind of necessary service? What does it mean? Does it have to do with transportation? So you can't just assume you have an understanding of the complex concepts that are coming out of federal and state government. You have to be a student of it. You have to be a student to RFP language from funders. And that's what I said. This is where they signal changes in policy. And then finally, you have to really pay attention to our think tanks and our policy statements. I'm always intrigued when some of the entities that I respect a lot, for example, a very large position paper came out today from the Conrad Hilton Foundation on some of the things that are happening in our country with families. It was brilliantly laid out and so thoughtful, and it began to tee up so many ideas about intervention. We have an opioid crisis right now. The opioid crisis is significant across the country, and some states spike more than others in terms of numbers of deaths, numbers of emergency room hospitalizations, number of emergency response calls. It's a significant issue in the country today. It's a great example of something that we wouldn't have predicted in 2009, 2010. It emerged in 2014, 2015, and you could begin to see SAMHSA talking about it if you were paying attention. And SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. You could begin to see some position papers coming out on the impact of the opioid crisis. And it would have behooved anyone that was thinking to pay attention to that. We did. And again, in some ways, thanks to one of our colleagues, we paid attention to an organization that was in New Hampshire that had basically gone out of business, and we brought it back to life and used it as our point of leverage for our substance use disorder work, for the commingling of substance use and mental health issues and the co-occurring disorders. We use that as a point of precise intervention and experimentation, testing the kinds of interventions that are going to work. And we're learning all of the time. So we're constantly paying attention to information. And as changes are identified, what do? So I have new information. Or one of you sends a great article, and that article starts to talk about something that I didn't even know was on the horizon. I'll go back to the opioid crisis for a moment. It wouldn't have taken much thinking to go down the track and say, wait a minute, there's massive amount of addiction, and that means that there is not only deaths, it also means that individuals are operating less than with all of their functionality, and that could impact the children in the home, and that will impact the child welfare roles. You could see that if you just sat and thought and paid attention to it. And I don't think we did it as well as we needed to. And I feel responsible in some ways for that. But we're on it. We're on it now. And we're on it at the point in time when the policy papers are really starting to come out. But we should have known it in the what's next? What's next? What's next? And as they're identified, we bring in experts in areas where we really need to have increased knowledge. We have some knowledge and some expertise about the foster care system and about opioid addiction and about the entire substance use disorder field. We need to understand more about a variety of other system impacts. And we need to understand how is that impacting first responders. And some of our work in Granite Pathways through our regional access point services is actually working in partnership with our first responders? Do we have a role there? So we bring in experts. We evaluate evolving market demands through the lens of IT and talent or knowledge. And I've talked a lot about understanding, is our IT robust enough, precise enough, current enough to enable us to go where we want to go? And do we have the talent? Do we even have a talent pool? Do we even have a talent pipeline? And then we analyze evolving market trends through the lens of mergers and acquisitions. One of the reasons that we sometimes go after a combination is because it brings in expertise. When we combined with Wildcat in our early days, they brought us we moved from being a voc rehab organization to a workforce organization when we combined with Wildcat. It was enlightening. There was terms that were used that I never even heard of in my life because they were in an entirely different field than we were in. Single Stop has brought us a whole new way of thinking about technology. Reserve, a whole new way of thinking about engaging older workers as partners. And I could go on, and I don't mean to leave anybody else out. But we target specific combinations to bring in talent and to bring in expertise. Okay, Stephen, I'm going to go to the next slide unless you tell me you've got some more questions, and I'm nearing the end here.
Yeah, please do, Lori.
Okay, so now let's ask ourselves, what are the future trends that we're preparing for? The very first trend is managed care. I've talked about that. We need to absolutely be ready in every way. We need to be aligned and have partnerships with managed care organizations who may actually win bids so that we're a subcontractor serving populations that the managed care companies don't know how to serve. And you cannot do that unless you have data to demonstrate your efficacy, unless you are smart and sharp about your finances. We are preparing for the managed care environment. It may bring on new partnerships, and that may be fine. It may be that we partner with organizations that can help us in our risk-bearing models, but we're preparing for managed care. We are absolutely preparing for the growth in trades. And just think about it. When we did our solution series on the cost benefits of increasing minimum wage, one of the things that we learned, and I was intrigued by that, is the high-paying trades that exist that are unfilled. And then we did our solution series on the impact of immigration on business bottom line, and we learned there that there is one category of visas that is completely filled with welders because it is an underpopulated growth field in our country, and there's just flat out not enough welders. So as visas under current policies start to decrease, that impacts available talent, and we need to be right there to improve our training and our education in the trades. People worry about the expense of college, and they love the fact that high-demand trades are very profitable. That's an area that we're looking at. And finally, the last area, and this is only just 3 that I wanted to talk about, is our expansion in criminal justice reform. I think that the work that we're doing with our Women's Project inside of Rikers, the work that we're doing with SMART inside of Rikers, and the work that we've done for years with Employment Works has positioned us to understand how to change the outcomes for the justice involved. And the first thing we are actively looking at is bail reform. Why is it that so many hundreds and hundreds, and I'll say hundreds for women, of women are in jail when if they just had $500, they'd be out. They don't have $500 to cover their bail, and they're detained. That's an unacceptable reality, and we've got to do something about bail reform. And we're on the cutting edge with our Rikers Women Project, and we're learning things. We're only served about maybe 20, 25 people, but every new person, we learn how to get our partners, our judges and our DAs and our prosecuting attorneys to think differently with us about the concept of bail and bail reform. And then we've got to go all the way upstream and identify what are the interventions that are going to stop the flow into prison. I'll give you a piece of information. Are you surprised that 52% of the young people who are being raised in foster care cross over to the juvenile justice system? 52%. They came in to the system because of abuse and neglect in their homes and ended up in the juvenile justice system because someone perceived that they broke a law. And often the law, the thing that they did is something like this. Parents didn't come to visit for a lot of different reasons, 5 weeks in a row, and they pushed their hand right through a wall, and that's considered, you know, basically destruction of property. Or they blew up in a very emotional circumstance and left and ran away, and in order to get some money, they robbed a store. They have a lot of their own triggers to behavior that end up in the juvenile justice system. And the most challenging thing is that's just a feeder to the adult justice system. So how can we get all the way back into juvenile justice and stop that flow? So it is now just about 4:30. If there's another question, great. If questions have come in, Stephen, that you want to send to me later, great. But I have so appreciated the interaction and the way in which you all have approached this learning. So, Stephen, if there's nothing else, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great, thank you. I've been getting a lot of questions about this being available by replay. It is. We are recording it now, and it will definitely be posted on news and announcements on our intranet site. The way it works is now once an item on news and announcements is uploaded, everyone in the agency gets an email. So once it's up, you'll get the email and be able to look at it as many times as you like. Outside of that, I'd like to thank everyone, especially Lori, for just an amazing presentation and lots to chew on now and in the future. So thanks again, Lori, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.